Good afternoon, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about RoboCop, the Marvel Comics movie adaptation. So, I had actually meant to do the review on this last night. I even made an Instagram post about it, but lo and behold, I ended up falling asleep, and hence why we're doing the review on this today instead of yesterday. And last night was actually the first time in quite some time that I had actually reread this adaptation, and it took me back because I remember I got this way back when I was still living with my parents, and the fact that RoboCop is one of my favorite movies, as I stated in my review of that movie, and the fact that Marvel Comics was doing an adaptation of it, or had done an adaptation of it. It came out in the same year, 1987, that the movie came out. And I was pretty psyched because I read a couple of other adaptations of movies that Marvel had done, like the Blade Runner adaptation, Kroll. That one especially, had some fantastic artwork by Brett Blevins. And so, I mean, they even did some stuff for Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, and I hadn't actually read those, but I'd seen some artwork from them. So, I mean, I was pretty sure that RoboCop would be in good hands, with Marvel adapting the movie. Plus, when I got this magazine, you see how big the magazine is. It was the exact same size as another magazine that Marvel had, years ago, called the Savage Sword of Conan. And basically, that magazine, it was black and white, and it would usually have, 2, maybe 3 stories, sometimes just one really big story. And because it wasn't code approved, they were able to get away with a lot more in the way of blood and gore and, female nudity. So, but yeah, so anyway, though, when I saw that this RoboCop, adaptation was basically in the same, size and format as the Savage Sword of Conan, I was pretty excited because I was thinking this was going to be kind of like the movie. It's like, the razor sharp wit and blood and gore. I mean, I know they'd have to tone it down somewhat, but at the same time, I was thinking, hey, it'd be, a reasonably bloody good time. And so, I like I said, I reread it for the first time last night, and I gotta say that it's a mixed bag because, I mean, on the plus side, it's a pretty faithful, if toned down adaptation of the movie, and they also, since it came out at the same time as the movie, I mean, they had a lot of photo references to work from. And speaking of photos, check this out on the back. The RoboCop theatrical poster, which was on the back cover, and I always loved this one. But anyway, though, so the adaptation was based on the original screenplay of the movie, but it was adapted by a gentleman by the name of Bob Harras. He was the guy who was writing this adaptation, and he's arguably best known for being an editor-in-chief at Marvel and DC at different times, obviously. But and the pencil artwork was done by Javier Saltares. I hope I'm saying that gentleman's name right, and Alan Kupperburg. And both of those guys, I can say, are very good artists. And I will say that, because they had a lot of photo references to work with, in adapting, the movie. I mean, the artwork, for the most part, it looks like, what was in the movie. But at the same time, though, they kind of, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes, which, guys doing which pages of art, because initially it's pretty easy to tell, but as the book gets to its end, the artwork seems a little more rushed, and you kind of get the feeling that maybe there was a deadline or something. But oh, and the inks were by a gentleman named Tony Dezuniga. And once again, I hope I'm saying his name right, but that guy, I can say, is a good inker. He's done, inks for just about everyone. But I was kind of excited when I saw that Javier Saltares was one of the artists on this book, because he, in fact, did a lot of the early artwork on the Danny Ketch Ghost Rider that was written by Howard Mackey back in the 90s. And that guy, for me, is one of the signature Ghost Rider artists. And to have him work on RoboCop, I was like, hey, I'm even more excited to reread this. So I will say that initially it's easy to tell which artist is drawing which panels and which pages, because Saltares has a very distinct gritty style, which tends to work well with more I guess crime drama oriented stories. And RoboCop, along with being a great science fiction story, is also a crime drama in a way, because it deals with capitalism gone awry, and and as well as a crime wave that is kind of working in tandem with the corrupt corporation. But anyway, though, so Saltares was definitely in his element when it came to drawings, the more criminal elements in the story. But I think when it came to, say, the more fantastical elements, like, say, Ed 209, I want to say it was Kupperburg who was drawing those sequences, because Kupperburg, if I remember correctly, has a more cartoonish style, and there are definitely times where the artwork goes from gritty and somewhat realistic to almost cartoonish, and so you can definitely tell it's not the same artist. And at those points, another thing is, and this is where I think maybe the rushed deadline feeling was kind of coming in, was the fact that initially when you see RoboCop with his gun, like what you see on the cover here. Oh, and by the way, the cover art is by a guy named Mark Teixeira, and he's also a long time accomplished artist, both as a penciler and an inker. But the cool thing is that he and Javier Saltares had worked on that aforementioned Ghost Rider book together. Saltares doing the pencils and Teixeira doing the inks, and eventually Teixeira took over full-time art duty on that book. So the fact that they both have their name on this book, albeit not necessarily together, I thought was pretty cool in hindsight. Teixeira doing the cover art, and Saltares doing some of the interior art. But anyway, though, like I was gonna say is, so like you look on the cover here, you see RoboCop's gun. That's what it looks like in the movie. And when you initially see RoboCop in action in the comic book, the gun, they do a pretty good job of making RoboCop look like he does in the movie. And as well as when you see him firing his gun, the gun looks like the gun from the movie. But then when it switches over to some of the more cartoonish art, which I believe was Kupperberg's art, the gun goes from looking like the gun from the movie to a power drill. And at that point you're like, well, okay, when did you change guns, RoboCop? But so like I said, unfortunately, it does feel kind of rushed at times, and there were also okay, so I know that there was going to be some toning down of the content from the movie, say in comparison to the comic book here. But I was hoping for, maybe just a little more of a rough edge to the proceedings. But is basically though is where you get this sort of very light version of the movie. I mean, the profanity is almost non-existent, which, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if, say a kid were to, find this, and read it. And, but also the violence, I gotta say, is not an out, bloodbath like say it was in the movie, but at the same time though it's just brutal enough to where you can tell, say, if someone's getting killed, that kind of thing. Or when Murphy gets Murphy, before becoming RoboCop, when he's horrifically killed, they basically allude to it happening, like through, say, it cuts away from just before the gun's pulled and you see the gunfire, but you don't see the damage being done to Murphy. But then you see Lewis trying to get to him, but you see like the shadow, Murphy's shadow, the shadow of Murphy being hit by multiple shotgun rounds. And so it's like you can tell he's getting brutally murdered, but you don't see all the blood and gore. So, I mean, it does still have a little bit of an edge in that respect, but at the same time, though, when it comes to, say, like, beyond that, a lot of the edge is gone. Like, say, when RoboCop, shoots a would-be rapist, like in the movie, he shoots the guy in the dick. But in the book, in this magazine here, he just shoots the guy in the wrist, and that, which definitely doesn't have the same brutality as the movie. So I mean, that isn't necessarily a problem, wouldn't be as much of a problem. But the other thing though is that there are certain parts in the movie that I think could have only worked in the movie in terms of the epic scale. Like say when RoboCop goes to the rock house or rock shop, where these bad guys are making cocaine, and he's like a one-man execution squad against them, and you have a really brilliantly choreographed action scene in the movie, but in the comic book here, that same moment is only like on a page or two, and that's it. So basically the epic feel is definitely lost. And the same thing with his struggle with Ed 209, which in the movie was an amazing moment, for amongst other things, having some fantastic stop motion animation by Phil Tippett and his special effects crew. But also, of course, you had Basil Palladorius's music, playing, which made things rather alarming and suspenseful. But then in the comic though, I mean, it could have been a moment that had some flair to it, because I mean, fights between a person and a robot have been done before in comic books, and they've been done rather well, and you can do fight choreography in a comic book. I mean, just ask someone like Jack Kirby, go look at some of his stuff, or Frank Miller, from back when Frank Miller could still draw. But here though, unfortunately, it's very rushed, and it really comes across as lazy. And it basically amounts to RoboCop more or less just punching one of Ed 209's gun arms, and then Ed 209 just resorts to firing his missiles at him. Whereas in the movie, Ed 209 gets his gun arm blown off because RoboCop grabs the one that's edging towards him and pushes it into the other gun arm. So basically there was a lot more choreography to it, but here it's just he literally just punches it and his gun arm's useless, that kind of thing. So that's what I mean when I say a lot of the epic scale is lost, and that artistic laziness unfortunately doesn't help either. And I mean, the other thing is, a lot of the emotional impact is lost too, because I honestly think that if this had been, say, an original creation and not an adaptation of RoboCop, or say, for instance, RoboCop wasn't even a movie and this was, say, an original comic book, creation, it might have actually, worked, say, from an emotional standpoint. But unfortunately, because it's adapting a very well done movie that, for all its blood and gore, has a surprising amount of humanity to it, unfortunately, that emotional impact is lost here, because, I mean, in the movie, you get that unforgettable scene where, Murphy, after he starts to remember who he was, he goes to his family's home, and, you see just, how much, so you see just what it was that he lost, in terms of, his family and what have you, and it's a very emotional scene. But here in the book, though, all that essentially happens is, he confronts, I mean, the first guy he confronts, that killed him, he's saying, why do you look so familiar? Who are you? Blah, blah, blah. And then the guy's saying, we killed you, man. Look it up. In which, I mean, to me is kind of bad writing. But so he literally does. I mean, like in the movie, in this respect, it's like the movie in the sense that, after, in the movie, he's demanding to know who the guy is, and the guy can't tell him, because he's, but, RoboCop, he finds out who the guy is by plugging into a police database, and, he does it in a similar way in the movie, but instead of, going to his old house, he visits his grave, and, basically, he gets, some, thought balloons about, this is who I was, and my family thinks I'm dead, and, that's it, and so it's just definitely not the same, and as far as, the emotional impact goes, it's, gone, but it did make me chuckle just a little bit, and I highly doubt that this was intentional on the creator's part, because, there's a movie called Phantasm 2, and that movie, in fact, the Phantasm movies in general tend to involve cemeteries quite a bit, but in one of the cemetery scenes in Phantasm 2, just as kind of a throwaway gag, there's a tombstone with Alex Murphy's name on it. And so, I mean, the people who made that movie were definitely RoboCop fans, but so I just thought that was funny because, this was done in 1987, which was the same year that the movie came out. And then, Phantasm 2 was I think it was 1988. And so it just made me think of that, but I highly doubt that the creative team here, had that, connection in mind, so a bit of, unintentional humor there, but at least on my part, but anyway, though, yeah, it's just, I mean, strictly speaking, it's, I mean, it does its job in adapting the movie, but it's kind of a bare bones adaptation. I mean, there's really nothing special. There's really nothing special to it. I mean, the closest I can say to there being something worthwhile, for RoboCop fans to check out is the fact that there's a scene or two in this comic book that happens differently from the movie, which, I mean, I'm not going to say it necessarily makes things better or worse, it's just different. I mean, granted, the example I just had about Murphy going to his grave not having the same amount of emotional impact as, him going to his home in the movie, I mean, that's an exception, but I mean, like, there's, for example, an instance where in the movie, when the movie opens up, there's a bit at the beginning where the news reporters, I mean, it opens up with it's like a media break, and it's TV channel of the news, and the reporters are talking about, amongst other things, the crime wave in Old Detroit, and how a group of police officers had been, murdered, with the exception of one of them, a guy named Frank Frederickson, I think, who was, gravely injured, but was still alive and was able to identify Clarence Boddicker and his gang as the assailants who, shot him and killed his partners. And unfortunately, you find out, a little bit after that, the guy dies. And so, you get the part in the police station where, in the locker rooms where, the police, find, the squadron, they find out about it, and you see their emotional, reaction to it, which is very believable. But so whereas in the comic book, though, you actually see the altercation that happened where Fredrickson, was shot and his partners were killed. And you see Clarence Boddicker and his gang kind of in action, sort of taunting him and things like that. So, I mean, that part was at least interesting to me in the sense of seeing it from a different perspective. But I'm not saying it makes it better or worse. It's just, interesting. But yeah, unfortunately though, so it's like the artwork, I mean, initially is, well done, but, after a certain point, probably about the midway point, starts getting a little more rushed. And even, the Saltares' art starts to become rushed as well. And to a point where it kind of looks just cartoonish in general, like on the parts of both him and Kupperburg. And it gets to a point where, when it gets to a conclusion, it's almost a parody, because in the movie, there's a part where there's a confrontation with an Ed 209 robot at the very end, and RoboCop is able to take him out, using a Cobra assault cannon is what they call in the movie. But in the comic, though, I get, like I said, they must have had like a rush deadline or something, because instead of bothering to show RoboCop getting the Cobra assault cannon and taking out Ed 209, he literally takes out his gun and just one shots Ed 209. Ed 209 blows up. That's it. And to add insult to injury, it's the point where the gun has gone from looking like the gun in the movie to, well, literally just a power drill. And so, I mean, at that point, it was really hard to get invested in it, just because the laziness, unfortunately, just kind of went into full swing. So yeah, I was kind of let down by this. I mean, I would say that, I mean, if you're a RoboCop fan, it's worth picking up just to say, hey, collector's item, that kind of thing. Or, if you wanted to see how a couple of things, looked different in the comic book, than the movie. I mean, it's interesting at times, but, otherwise it's kind of a, toned down and arguably dumbed down, adaptation of the movie. I mean, still tells the same story as the movie, but doesn't have any of the same emotional weight, any of the satirical wit or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and give this, adaptation 2 out of 5 stars. It was okay. I mean, it's definitely not the worst thing I've read, and it did kind of take me back a little bit, but at the same time, it just, after you've seen the movie and then you read this, the movie wins out, big time. But also just, it's really not that memorable of an adaptation, unfortunately. So, yeah, that was my take on the Marvel Comics adaptation of RoboCop. Thank you all for taking the time to check out my review. Y'all got any questions, comments? Let me know. Have a good day. Bye.